He begged his ex-wife to save his son. Her response set his world on fire. Lauren Wells stared at the photo of 12-year-old Ethan Belvedere, knowing she held the only real hope of finding him alive. The same man who destroyed her in court 8 years ago now stood in her office doorway, desperation replacing the cold arrogance she remembered. "You're the only one who can track him," Alistair whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, I'll do anything." Would she save the son of the man who'd shattered her world? The fluorescent lights of the FBI's Child Recovery Division cast harsh shadows across Lauren's desk as she studied the missing child report. Ethan Belvedere, age 12, last seen leaving his elite private academy 3 days ago. The surveillance photos showed a boy with a determined jawline that reminded her of someone she'd tried desperately to forget, but softer eyes that held an innocence she once thought she might help nurture. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the timeline. No ransom demands, no obvious suspects, a trail growing colder by the hour. Detective Paloma Varela had briefed her on the basics. Parents divorced, father has primary custody, mother out of the picture for years. Kid was reportedly happy, excellent student, but something had been bothering him in the weeks before he disappeared. The knock at her office door interrupted her analysis. Lauren looked up, expecting Paloma with additional case files, but the figure in her doorway made her world tilt dangerously off its axis. Alistair Belvedere stood there like a ghost from her worst nightmares, 8 years older, but still devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. The steel-gray eyes that once looked at her with love now held a desperation so raw it took her breath away. Gone was the cold, calculating attorney who had systematically destroyed her character in divorce court. This man looked broken, terrified. "Agent Wells," he said, his voice carefully formal, though she heard the slight tremor beneath. The way he spoke her name, with such careful distance when once it had been a caress, sent an unwelcome shiver through her. Lauren forced ice into her tone, years of professional training warring with the emotional chaos his presence unleashed. "Mr. Belvedere, I wasn't aware you knew where I worked." He took a hesitant step into her office, and she caught the scent that time hadn't erased, cedar and something uniquely him that had once meant safety, home forever. Now it just reminded her of everything she'd lost. "I need to talk to you about Ethan," he said, and the careful composure cracked completely. "He's been missing for 3 days. The police have nothing. The FBI agents assigned initially. They're good people, but they don't understand children the way you do." She studied him with analytical skills that made her exceptional at her job, noting the hollow shadows under his eyes, the way his expensive suit couldn't hide the tension coiled in his shoulders. This wasn't the controlled, ruthless man who had questioned her stability 8 years ago. This was a father drowning in terror. "Why should I help you?" The question emerged quietly, but Lauren saw him flinch as if she'd struck him. "After what you did to me?" Alistair's jaw clenched, that familiar stubborn set she'd once found endearing and later learned to fear. "Because despite everything between us, you're the only person who can bring my son home. And somewhere inside, you still have a heart." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Despite the walls she'd constructed around the wreckage of their marriage, she did still have a heart. And that heart was already breaking for a 12-year-old boy who was probably scared, possibly hurt, definitely in danger. Lauren moved to her evidence board, partly to create distance and partly because she needed something to do with her hands. Alistair followed instinctively, and suddenly they were standing close enough to touch, close enough that she felt his warmth, heard his uneven breathing. "Tell me about the weeks before he disappeared," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Relief flooded his features so completely that she had to look away. He'd been withdrawn for about a month, quiet at dinner, not interested in activities he usually loved. I thought maybe it was just normal preteen stuff, but my instincts told me something was wrong. What about his social circle? Anyone new in his life? That's the thing. Alistair moved closer, ostensibly to point at the timeline she was sketching. He mentioned wanting to visit someone from before, but wouldn't elaborate when I asked who. Lauren's pen stilled on the paper. Someone from before could mean any number of things, but given their family history, it raised uncomfortable possibilities. Before the divorce? The question hung between them, loaded with 8 years of unspoken history. "I'll take the case," Lauren said finally, her professional oath warring with every self-protective instinct. "But we work by my rules. This is about Ethan, not about us." Relief flooded his face so completely it was painful to witness. "Anything. I'll do anything you need." Have you ever had to work with someone who broke your heart? Someone whose presence alone could unravel years of carefully built defenses? Tell me your story in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're already invested in Lauren's impossible choice. The case briefing revealed disturbing details. Ethan had been acting strangely for weeks, asking odd questions about family relationships, seeming to wait for something. The security footage showed him leaving school voluntarily with someone just outside the camera's range, someone he clearly knew and trusted. "This wasn't a stranger abduction," Lauren explained as they reviewed evidence together. "Ethan went with this person willingly. That suggests someone who knew our family dynamics, who understood his emotional vulnerabilities." They worked through the afternoon, falling into a rhythm that was both painfully familiar and professionally necessary. Lauren's analytical mind-mapping possibilities while Alistair's legal training helped organize evidence. Despite their personal history, they functioned well together, her intuitive leaps complemented by his methodical approach. But the professional cooperation came with a cost. Every shared glance, every moment when their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same file, reminded her of what they'd once had together. Cross-referencing Ethan's school records revealed a concerning pattern. 3 other children from wealthy, divorced families had gone missing over the past 2 years. All had been recovered safely, but each case involved someone who had intimate knowledge of the family's private struggles. "We're looking at someone who targets children from broken homes," Lauren concluded. "Someone who gains their trust by offering what they feel they're missing, usually family connection or understanding." Alistair's face had gone pale. Someone is preying on kids whose parents are divorced? Someone who might be vulnerable to promises of fixing what feels broken in their lives. The weight of implications settled between them. Ethan's vulnerability wasn't just about the divorce. It was about the specific trauma of watching his parents destroy each other in court. Their first lead took them to an abandoned warehouse district after midnight. Moving through the shadows between buildings, Lauren stumbled over loose debris. Strong hands caught her before she could fall, pulling her back against a solid chest, steadying her with gentle strength. "Careful," Alistair whispered, his breath warm against her ear, his arms encircling her waist with protective instinct that felt as natural as breathing. For a frozen moment, they stood pressed together in the darkness, her back against his chest, his hands spread across her ribs, both feeling the other's racing pulse. The familiar scent of him surrounded her, cedar and warmth and something uniquely male that made her remember mornings waking in his arms. His thumb traced unconsciously across the fabric of her jacket, so gentle and automatic that Lauren's breath caught. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, strong and rapid, could sense the tension coiled in his muscles. "Lauren," he whispered, her name a prayer and a question and an apology all wrapped together. She should have stepped away, should have re-established professional distance. Instead, she found herself sinking back against his strength, letting herself remember for just one moment what it felt like to be cherished, protected, home. His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with reverent tenderness, in the moonlight filtering through broken warehouse windows. She could see the longing in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted and everything he'd lost. "Don't," she whispered, but made no move to escape his embrace. His other hand slid into her hair, fingers tangling in the silken strands as he tilted her face toward his. "I never stopped." A sound in the darkness shattered the moment. Footsteps on gravel, voices carried on the night wind. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, professional training overriding personal longing as they remembered where they were and why they'd come. The warehouse yielded no trace of Ethan, but the moment between them had shifted something fundamental. As they drove back to headquarters in careful silence, Lauren caught herself stealing glances at Alistair's profile, remembering the way he'd held her, the gentleness in his touch. The next morning brought new leads and uncomfortable revelations. Lauren arrived at headquarters to find Alistair already there with 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with cream, and 2 sugars, prepared exactly the way she'd liked it 8 years ago. "You remembered," she said quietly, accepting the cup because refusing would make too much of the moment. "I remember everything about you," he replied, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, about your preferences, professional things." Detective Varela joined them with a breakthrough. Cross-referenced the missing children reports with family court records. All 4 families were represented by the same social services agency during their divorce proceedings. Lauren's blood ran cold. Someone inside the system? Someone with access to confidential family assessments, custody evaluation reports, details about children's emotional vulnerabilities. Paloma's face was grim. Information that would make it easy to manipulate a confused, hurting kid. Alistair leaned forward. Those reports would contain everything. Our arguments, Ethan's reactions to the custody battles, his feelings about the divorce. "Susan Brennan," Alistair said suddenly, his voice strange. "Who's Susan Brennan?" Paloma asked. "Our court-appointed social worker during the custody proceedings. She conducted Ethan's interviews, assessed family dynamics, made recommendations to the judge." Lauren felt a chill. Susan Brennan had been present for some of their most painful moments, had witnessed their marriage disintegrating, had documented their failures as partners and parents. "We need to find her," Lauren said. "Now." Their investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Susan had left her position 6 months ago, citing personal reasons. Her forwarding address led to an empty apartment. Her phone was disconnected. She'd effectively vanished, leaving behind only a trail of broken families. The FBI conference room became their war room as they mapped connections. Lauren found herself falling into rhythm with Alistair's investigative approach. His methodical legal mind complementing her intuitive profiling skills. During one of these intense work sessions, their first real moment of tension exploded. "We should expand the search radius," Lauren insisted, standing to point at the map mounted on the wall. "If Brennan is our suspect, she'd want isolation, somewhere she could control the environment." "That's inefficient resource allocation," Alistair countered, moving to block her view. "We should focus our efforts here, in urban areas where she'd have easier access to supplies." Their disagreement escalated quickly, professional differences becoming heated debate as stress and fear overwhelmed their careful courtesy. "You're thinking like a lawyer," Lauren accused, her voice rising. "This isn't about legal strategy, it's about understanding criminal psychology. And you're thinking like a profiler who's never coordinated multiple agency resources," Alistair shot back, stepping closer. "We can't just follow hunches when a child's life is at stake." They were standing inches apart now, both breathing hard from the intensity of their argument, both aware that this was about more than search strategies. The conference room had fallen silent around them, other agents watching with uncomfortable fascination. Lauren became aware of everything in that suspended moment, his proximity, his intensity, the way his eyes blazed with frustration, and something deeper that made her pulse race. His cologne mingled with the scent of fear, sweat, and determination. Alistair's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, and she saw the exact moment professional disagreement transformed into something far more dangerous. The air between them crackled with suppressed electricity. Detective Varela cleared her throat loudly. "Perhaps we could expand the search in phases," she suggested diplomatically. The spell broke. Lauren and Alistair stepped apart simultaneously, professional masks sliding back into place. Their first field investigation took them to a rough neighborhood where Susan had allegedly been seen. When they approached a group of men dealing drugs, one stepped forward aggressively. "Don't see no missing kids around here, lady. Maybe you should mind your own business." Alistair's protective instincts overrode everything else. His arm shot across Lauren's body, pulling her behind his protective bulk as he faced down the threat with quiet authority. "Easy," the lady asked a simple question. Lauren felt his hand spread across her ribs, felt his muscles coil with tension as he calculated distances, prepared to fight if necessary. His heartbeat thundered against her palm, where her hand instinctively pressed against his chest. The confrontation diffused quickly, but Alistair's arm remained around Lauren long after the threat had passed. Both were lost in the intimate cocoon of his protection. "I can handle myself," Lauren said quietly, but there was no rebuke in her voice. "I know," Alistair replied, his arm tightening slightly. "But I can't handle watching someone threaten you." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Working late at Lauren's apartment that evening, surrounded by case files, they finally felt like they were making progress. Lauren had changed into comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, and the domestic setting made their collaboration feel dangerously intimate. That's when Lauren found it, a photograph tucked behind other evidence, showing Ethan laughing at what looked like a birthday party. The image broke something inside her that she'd been carefully holding together. Years of suppressed grief came pouring out in silent tears. The child she'd never had, the family she'd lost, the maternal instincts she'd buried so deep, it all crashed over her in devastating longing. Alistair was beside her instantly, his careful professional distance crumbling. "Hey," he whispered, reaching for her. She didn't pull away when his fingers caught her tears, when he drew her against his chest with infinite tenderness. "I wanted children," she whispered brokenly. "We were trying when everything fell apart." His arms tightened around her. "I know. I remember." "I was pregnant," she continued, the secret she'd carried for 8 years finally spilling out. "During our divorce proceedings, I lost the baby the day before our final hearing." Alistair's entire body went rigid with shock. "What? Lauren? No, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd already painted me as unstable, unfit. I thought losing the baby proved you were right." Her voice broke completely. "Oh, God." His voice was raw with pain. "Lauren, I would have stopped everything. The divorce, the custody battle, all of it. That baby was ours." She lifted her face to his, seeing the devastation in his eyes. "We were so busy destroying each other that we destroyed everything else too." His hands framed her face with desperate tenderness. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I took from us." The kiss was inevitable, born from shared grief and 8 years of longing. His lips touched hers with desperate hunger, hands tangling in her hair as she pressed closer to his warmth. Her body remembered his touch, came alive under his hands. They kissed like they were drowning, and each other was oxygen, like 8 years of separation could be erased in a single moment. His hands traced her face, her throat, the line of her shoulders, as if memorizing her all over again. Just as rational thought dissolved completely, just as his hands found the hem of her sweater and she was ready to lose herself in him completely, the police scanner crackled to life with a transmission that froze them both. "All units, we have a report of a child's voice calling for help." Ethan. They'd found a trace of Ethan. Reality crashed back as they sprang apart, professional training overriding personal need. But as they grabbed their equipment and prepared to race towards their first real break, Lauren caught Alistair's eyes across the room. The longing there, the promise of what had almost happened, the reminder of everything they'd once shared, it all hung between them like an unfinished sentence. Because first, they had to save his son. Everything else would have to wait. But as they drove through the night toward what might be Ethan's location, Lauren realized that some things couldn't be postponed forever. The connection between them was too strong, the chemistry too electric. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to careful professional distance. Some bridges once crossed changed everything that came after. Chapter 2. The police transmission led them to a remote area where cell towers had picked up what sounded like a child's distressed call, but the motel they'd been tracking was a dead end. Susan Brennan had been there, but she'd moved on, taking Ethan with her. The hasty departure and evidence of interrupted meals told Lauren that something had spooked their suspect. "She's running scared," Lauren analyzed, "or someone tipped her off that we were getting close." The storage facility they discovered on the outskirts of town revealed the true scope of Susan's obsession. Files upon files of documentation about broken families, photographs of children taken without permission, detailed notes about emotional trauma, behavioral changes, psychological damage caused by custody battles. But it was the video equipment that made Lauren's hands shake with rage. "She's been filming them," she whispered, staring at cameras, recording devices, editing equipment. recording their reactions, their pain, their confusion. Alistair's face had gone white. She's making some kind of documentary, using our children as proof that divorce ruins kids' lives. The storage unit yielded one crucial piece of evidence, an address scrawled on paper, hidden beneath stacks of legal documents, a cabin in the mountains, isolated enough for Susan's purposes but accessible enough to continue her twisted research. As they prepared for what felt like a final confrontation, they were forced to stay overnight in a small mountain town. The only available accommodation was a rustic hotel with limited rooms and a single king-size bed that dominated their assigned space. "I can sleep on the floor," Alistair offered, though Lauren saw the heat in his eyes. "We're adults," she said, though her voice was unsteady. "We can handle this professionally." But lying in darkness, hyper-aware of his breathing beside her, professional was the last thing either of them felt. The thunderstorm that rolled through the mountains made sleep impossible. Lightning illuminated the small room while rain hammered against windows. "I can't sleep either," he said quietly, apparently feeling her gaze on him. "Too much adrenaline," she replied, though they both knew it was more than that. He turned to face her, and in the next flash of lightning, she saw the longing in his eyes, the careful distance he was maintaining even as every line of his body spoke of wanting to close the space between them. "Lauren," he whispered, her name a question and a prayer. She should have maintained distance, should have remembered all the reasons they'd divorced. Instead, she found herself moving closer to his warmth. "We can't," she whispered, even as she felt herself gravitating toward him like iron to a magnet. "I know," he replied, but his hand reached for her face anyway, fingers tracing her cheek with reverent tenderness. "But I never stopped wanting you, never stopped loving you, even when I was destroying us." The confession hung between them in the storm-charged darkness. When Lauren didn't pull away from his touch, Alistair's other arm slid around her waist, drawing her closer. "We hurt each other so badly," she whispered against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. "Then let us heal each other," he murmured into her hair. "Let us try to fix what we broke." The kiss that followed was different from their desperate encounter in her apartment. This was tender, questioning, full of 8 years' worth of longing and regret. His lips moved against hers with the reverence of a man who knew exactly what he'd lost and what he was being offered the chance to reclaim. Lauren felt herself melting into his embrace, her body remembering the safety and passion she'd found in his arms. When his hands tangled in her hair, when he deepened the kiss with gentle hunger, she forgot every reason they shouldn't be doing this. His hands slid to the hem of her shirt with careful reverence, asking permission with every touch. When she nodded against his lips, when she helped him lift the fabric away, they came together with the desperate tenderness of people reclaiming something precious they'd thought lost forever. In the candlelight from the power outage, with rain creating a cocoon of privacy around them, they rediscovered each other slowly, carefully. Every kiss was an apology, every caress a promise, every whispered endearment a healing balm for wounds that had ached for 8 years. When they finally came together completely, it was with tears of relief and wonder, with the understanding that some connections transcend time and pain and every logical reason to protect themselves. They moved together with remembered rhythm, made new by wisdom and loss, by the knowledge of exactly what they'd thrown away and what they were choosing to rebuild. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms with rain pattering against windows, Lauren felt complete for the first time in years. "I never stopped loving you either," she whispered against his chest, "not even when I hated you." His arms tightened around her. "You are the only home I've ever known." But morning brought harsh reality crashing back. Lauren woke in Alistair's arms, feeling more complete than she had in 8 years, only to be jolted by the shrill ring of his phone. "Madison," he said quietly, recognizing the number of his girlfriend of 2 years. "I have to take this." Lauren felt the familiar chill as Alistair stepped away to answer, his voice dropping to careful tones. She could hear fragments, Madison's sharp questions about where he'd been, her concern about his emotional state, her pointed reminders about their relationship. When Madison asked if he was coming home, if things could return to normal, Lauren watched his face transform with the weight of impossible choices. He looked at her across the room, and she knew they were both remembering that their night together didn't exist in a vacuum. I need time, Alistair said finally, to process everything that's happened. The conversation ended with Madison's obvious displeasure, and the silence that followed felt loaded with complications they'd temporarily forgotten. She has a right to be angry, Lauren said quietly, straightening her clothes with carefully controlled movements. You've been in a relationship with her for 2 years. Lauren, what happened between us last night? Was a reaction to stress and adrenaline and unfinished business, she interrupted, needing to say the words before she lost her nerve. It doesn't change the fact that you're with someone else now. But even as she said it, Lauren knew she was lying. What had happened between them hadn't been just physical release. It had been coming home. Alistair stepped closer, his eyes intense with determination. Don't do this. Don't retreat into that professional shell because you're scared. I'm not scared. I'm being realistic. You're terrified, he countered, afraid that if you let yourself believe this is real, I'll disappoint you again. Their conversation was interrupted by Ethan's voice, crackling through an emergency radio. They'd triangulated his location to Susan Brennan's mountain cabin. The cabin was exactly what Lauren's profile had predicted: isolated, defensible, equipped with escape routes. The FBI tactical team moved with precision, surrounding the building while Lauren and Alistair waited in the command vehicle. Let me go in first, Lauren requested. Let me talk to Susan. She might respond better to another woman. The confrontation inside was nothing like Lauren had expected. Susan Brennan sat at a makeshift desk, surrounded by video equipment and files, looking more like a sad researcher than a dangerous kidnapper. Ethan huddled on a couch nearby, clearly unharmed but obviously confused and frightened. Agent Wells, Susan said calmly, you came for the boy. I came to help you, Lauren replied, keeping her voice steady. I know what happened to you, Susan. I know about your children, about the custody battle that took them away. Susan's composure cracked slightly. They said I was unstable, unfit, just like they said about you during your divorce proceedings. You read my file. I read all the files, every family I've studied, every case where the courts destroyed children's lives in the name of justice. Susan's voice grew passionate. I'm documenting the truth, that the system is broken, that divorce traumatizes children in ways that never heal. You're right, Lauren said quietly, and meant it. The system is broken. Children do suffer when families fall apart, but taking Ethan, frightening him, that's not helping him. I'm showing him the truth about what his parents' selfishness cost him. Susan's voice rose to near hysteria. Lauren felt each word like a knife, because they echoed her own deepest fears about the divorce. You're wrong, Lauren said firmly. Ethan's parents made mistakes, terrible, painful mistakes, but they love him. They've grown from their failures. That's what people do. They break, and then they find ways to heal. There is no healing from what they did. That's when Ethan spoke up, his young voice cutting through the adult dysfunction with startling clarity. I don't want my parents to be perfect, he said, looking directly at Susan. I just want them to love me, and they do. Even when they mess up, even when they can't live together, they still love me. The simple wisdom diffused the situation more effectively than any tactical intervention. Susan broke down completely, the weight of her own loss finally overwhelming the twisted purpose that had driven her. The arrest was peaceful. Ethan ran into Lauren's arms with trust and relief that nearly broke her heart, and she held him close while FBI agents processed the scene. When Alistair finally held his son again, Lauren watched through tears as father and child clung to each other with desperate relief. She'd helped reunite them, had used her skills to bring this family back together. But standing in that doorway, watching the man she'd once loved hold the child who might have been hers, Lauren realized that some victories came with their own heartbreak. The drive back to the city was quiet. Ethan sleeping in the back seat while Lauren and Alistair navigated the careful distance of people who had crossed lines they couldn't uncross. Thank you, Alistair said quietly as they pulled into FBI headquarters, for everything, for finding him, for saving him, for... He trailed off, but they both knew what he meant. It's my job, Lauren replied, though they both knew it had become much more than that. They were saying goodbye in the FBI parking garage when Madison Pierce stepped out of a sleek black sedan, her designer clothes and perfect makeup a stark contrast to Lauren's rumpled attire. She moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her place in Alistair's life. "Alistair," Madison said, her voice carefully controlled, "I was worried when you didn't come home last night." Lauren felt herself becoming invisible as Madison embraced Alistair, as she cooed over Ethan with practiced warmth. This was reality, not the suspended bubble of crisis and need, but the actual world where other people had claims and rights. "Madison, this is Agent Wells," Alistair said, his voice strained. "She's the one who found Ethan." Madison's smile was perfectly polite and completely cold. "Thank you so much for bringing him home safely. I'm sure you understand how grateful we are." The casual assumption of possession, we instead of he, was expertly delivered. Lauren found herself almost admiring the other woman's skill, even as it cut her. "Just doing my job," Lauren replied. "Of course." Madison's arm slid possessively around Alistair's waist. "Well, now that this nightmare is over, we can get back to normal. Get Ethan settled, maybe take that vacation we've been planning." Lauren watched Alistair's face, seeing the conflict there, the way he struggled with decisions he wasn't ready to make. But she also saw the way he didn't return Madison's embrace with enthusiasm, how his eyes kept finding hers. "I should go," Lauren said quickly. "I have reports to file." But as she turned to leave, Alistair's voice stopped her. "Lauren, wait." She turned back to find him looking at her with an intensity that made Madison's smile falter. For a moment, Lauren thought he might say something that would change everything. Instead, he just said, "Thank you. For everything." The words were carefully neutral, professionally appropriate, but Lauren heard the subtext, saw the longing in his eyes. "You're welcome," she replied, then forced herself to walk away. Behind her she heard raised voices, Madison's sharp questions and Alistair's defensive responses, the sound of a relationship under strain. That evening, alone in her apartment, Lauren tried to return to normal routine. But everything felt different now. Her apartment seemed too quiet, too empty, too much like the refuge of someone hiding from life. Her phone rang just after midnight. "I ended it with Madison," Alistair's voice came through, rough with emotion. "I couldn't, after last night, after everything I couldn't pretend anymore." Lauren's heart hammered against her ribs, hope and terror warring in her chest. "Alistair, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I have to choose, Lauren, and I choose you. I choose us, if there still is an us." The question hung between them, loaded with 8 years of history and the fragile possibility of a future. "I'm scared," Lauren admitted. "So am I, but more afraid of letting you walk away again without fighting for what we could have." Sometimes healing requires revisiting our deepest wounds. Have you ever had to face the moments that broke your heart to save the love that mattered most? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's continuation of Lauren and Alistair's journey toward forgiveness. What if we can't make it work? What if we just hurt each other again? Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering. The silence stretched as Lauren battled with fear and hope, with safe loneliness and terrifying possibility. "Okay," she said finally, the word barely audible but carrying the weight of surrender. "Okay? Okay, let's try. Let's see if we can build something better than what we destroyed." She could hear his relief through the phone. "Can I see you tomorrow? Not as FBI agent and civilian, not as ex-husband and ex-wife, just, can I see you?" "Yes," Lauren said, and for the first time in 8 years felt like she was choosing hope instead of fear. But even as she hung up, even as she allowed herself to imagine a future where they might find their way back to each other, Lauren knew their challenges were just beginning. Because love was only the first step. The real work would be proving to themselves, to Ethan, to the world that some second chances were worth every risk they required. Chapter 3. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of rebuilding trust and rediscovering each other. Alistair kept his promise about courting her, flowers delivered with handwritten notes, thoughtful text messages, invitations to low-pressure activities that allowed them to reconnect without the weight of history overwhelming every moment. Lauren found herself looking forward to his calls with an excitement she hadn't felt since their early courtship. But more than romance, she was surprised by how naturally they fell back into being partners, consulting each other about decisions, sharing the details of their days, creating emotional intimacy that had always been the foundation of their connection. The restaurant where Alistair asked to meet her was intimate without being presumptuous, public enough to feel safe, private enough for the conversation that could change everything. When he walked through the door, in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater instead of his usual expensive suits, Lauren's breath caught. He looked younger, more approachable, more like the man she'd fallen in love with. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. "How's Ethan?" Lauren asked, genuinely caring, but also needing to ease into deeper waters. "Better than expected." "Resilient," his expression softened. "He's been asking about you, wondering when he'll see you again." The admission made her heart clench. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that adults sometimes need time to figure out complicated feelings, but that confusion doesn't mean things are wrong." Alistair reached across the table, his fingers tracing her hand with touches that sent electricity through her system. "I ended things with Madison completely. No ambiguity, no false hope. I told her I was still in love with my ex-wife, and that trying to build something with anyone else wasn't fair to her." The words hit Lauren like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected, but because they were exactly what she'd hoped to hear and exactly what terrified her most. "Alistair, I know you're scared," he continued, his thumb tracing patterns on her wrist. "I know I hurt you in ways that might never completely heal. I know trusting me again feels like stepping off a cliff." "It does," she admitted quietly, "because loving you was the most beautiful and most destructive thing I've ever experienced. When we were good together, we were incredible. When we were bad, we were weapons," he finished. "We turned our love into ammunition and nearly destroyed each other." The brutal honesty settled between them like a challenge. They'd spent 8 years avoiding the complete truth of what their marriage had become. Now, they were finally brave enough to name it. "What makes you think we can do better this time?" Lauren asked. Alistair was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because we're different people now, older, hopefully wiser, because we've both learned what life feels like without each other, and maybe that's taught us not to take what we have for granted." He paused, his fingers still tracing gentle patterns on her skin. "And because this time, we're choosing each other with full knowledge of our capacity for destruction. We're not naive kids believing love conquers all. We're adults who know that love has to be partnered with respect, with patience, with the daily choice to build instead of tear down." Lauren felt tears pricking her eyes from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen, truly understood. "I saw a therapist, after the divorce, for years, trying to understand my part in what went wrong." "What did you learn?" "That I have a tendency to run when things get difficult, that I'd rather walk away than fight for what I want because fighting feels too risky." She met his eyes directly. "I walked away from us instead of making you face what we were throwing away. And I learned that control is just fear wearing a business suit. I tried to manage you, manage us, manage every outcome because I was terrified that if I didn't have complete control, I'd lose everything that mattered. So you pushed first." "So I pushed first," he agreed. "Told myself I was protecting myself when really I was just too afraid to be vulnerable." They were interrupted by the waiter, but when he left with their hastily chosen selections, Alistair didn't release her hand. Instead, he brought it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that made her pulse race. "I missed this," he said quietly. "Not just the physical connection, but this. Sitting across from you, talking through complicated things, feeling like we're partners instead of adversaries. I missed it too, more than I let myself admit." The conversation shifted to safer topics during dinner, but underneath the surface pleasantries, the real conversation continued through touches and glances and awareness that made ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. It was when they were sharing dessert that Alistair raised the question hovering between them all evening. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. Lauren set down her fork, knowing this was the moment that would determine their future. Slowly, very, very slowly. With counseling, probably. With clear boundaries and honest communication and the understanding that we're both going to mess this up sometimes. Relief flooded his features. "So we're trying?" Really trying? We're trying. She squeezed his hand. But Alistair, if we do this, if we really commit to rebuilding what we destroyed, I need you to understand something. Anything. I won't survive losing you again. Not the way I lost you before, not with that level of cruelty and destruction. If this doesn't work, if we can't make it work, we end it with kindness, with respect. We don't turn our love into weapons again. The gravity in her voice made him still completely. Lauren, I would never. You said that before, she interrupted gently. We both said a lot of things before. I'm not trying to punish you for the past, but I need you to understand that this time, the stakes are different. This time, I'm choosing you with full knowledge of what we're both capable of. Alistair lifted their joined hands to his heart, pressing her palm against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm. I choose you. Not just for now, not just while it's easy, but for all of it. I choose us, Lauren, and I promise you, I swear to you, that I will never again use your love for me as a weapon against you. The vow hung between them like a sacred thing, and Lauren felt something that had been broken inside her for 8 years finally begin to heal. Walking back to her car, their hands intertwined like teenagers, Lauren allowed herself to imagine a future she hadn't dared dream about. Family dinners with Ethan, lazy Sunday mornings, the kind of partnership that made both of them stronger. Can I see you tomorrow? Alistair asked as they reached her car, his body close enough that she could feel his warmth. Yes, she said, then surprised herself by reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. But slowly, remember? His eyes darkened at her touch, and she saw the effort it cost him to maintain control. Slowly, he agreed. But Lauren? Yes? I'm going to court you this time. Really court you the way I should have done the first time. I'm going to prove to you that I can be the partner you deserve. The promise made her chest tight with emotion. You don't have to prove anything to me, Alistair. You just have to be honest. Be real. Be the man I fell in love with before we got so scared of losing each other that we forgot how to hold on. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 8 years' worth of longing and regret. It was a kiss that tasted like hope and forgiveness, like the possibility of second chances and the courage to believe in love even after it had wounded them both. Good night, she whispered against his lips. Good night, he replied, but neither moved to create distance. Finally, with tremendous effort, Alistair stepped back. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll answer, she promised. It was 3 weeks into their cautious reconnection that their relationship faced its first real test. Lauren was working late when her phone rang with Ethan's panicked voice. Lauren, I'm sorry to bother you, but something's wrong with Dad and I don't know who else to call. Her blood went cold. What's wrong, sweetie? Where are you? We're at home, but Dad's been acting weird all day, really quiet and distracted, and then he got this phone call and now he's just sitting in his study staring at nothing. Lauren was already grabbing her keys. I'll be right there, Ethan. Stay with your dad, okay? She found Alistair exactly as Ethan had described, sitting behind his desk, staring into space with the kind of hollow expression that spoke of devastating news. On the desk was a legal document that made her stomach clench with dread. Motion for emergency custody modification, she read aloud, watching him flinch. Madison, he said quietly, his voice flat and emotionless. She's filed for emergency custody of Ethan. Claims I'm an unfit father due to emotional instability, questionable judgment in romantic relationships, and creating an unsafe environment by reuniting with my unstable ex-wife. The words hit Lauren like physical blows. She can't do this. She has no legal standing. She has documentation, Alistair interrupted, his voice still that terrifying monotone. Photos of me at the FBI safe house, witness statements about my emotional state, evidence of my impulsive decision to end our relationship after the crisis resolved. Lauren felt cold realization wash over her. She's been building a case. For months, apparently, documenting every time I seemed stressed, every parenting decision she disagreed with, every moment of normal human emotion that she could spin as evidence of instability. The calculating cruelty of it took Lauren's breath away. While Alistair had been grateful for Madison's support, she'd been systematically collecting ammunition to use against him. The family court judge who will hear this case, Judge Morrison, the same judge who presided over our original divorce proceedings. Lauren remembered Judge Morrison, a stern woman who had clearly been appalled by the level of bitterness and cruelty in their divorce. If Madison's legal team painted their reunion as a return to that same destructive pattern. "She's not wrong about one thing," Alistair continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I am making impulsive decisions based on emotion. I chose you over her without thinking about how it would affect Ethan." "Stop!" Lauren's voice cut through his self-recrimination like a blade. "Don't you dare let her make you believe that loving me is a mistake that hurts your son." But even as she said it, Lauren felt her own doubts surfacing. Was their reunion really in Ethan's best interest? Had she allowed her feelings to override her judgment about what was healthy for a 12-year-old who had already suffered enough disruption? "Maybe she's right," Lauren said quietly. "Maybe my being here, us trying again, is selfish. Maybe what's best for Ethan is—" No. This time it was Alistair who interrupted, his eyes blazing with sudden fierce intensity. "Don't let her poison us against each other. Don't let her make us doubt what we've found together." He stood, moving to frame her face with his hands. "I love you. I love you, and Ethan loves you, and what we have together is good and healthy and exactly what both of us needed to heal. Madison's manipulation doesn't change that. But if being with me costs you your son, then we figure out how to fight for both of you," Alistair said firmly, "because I'm not choosing between the two most important people in my life. Not again." His phone rang, his lawyer calling with preliminary analysis of Madison's filing. The legal position was stark. Madison's case wasn't frivolous. She'd been thorough, systematic, building a narrative that painted Alistair's emotional journey as instability and his reunion with Lauren as proof of poor judgment. "Emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Alistair said when he hung up. "Madison's asking for immediate temporary custody pending a full evaluation." The speed of it, the calculated timing, spoke to the level of planning that had gone into this attack. "I should go," Lauren said quietly, the words cutting her heart. "I should step back, let you handle this without the complication of—" "No." Alistair's voice was steel wrapped in determination. "That's exactly what she wants. She wants to isolate me, make me feel like loving you is a weakness." He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her with protective strength. "We face this together, all three of us, as a family." But even as Lauren allowed herself to be held, she couldn't shake the cold fear that some battles couldn't be won with love alone, and that sometimes the people you loved most were the ones who paid the highest price for your choices. The next 24 hours would determine not just Alistair's custody of his son, but the future of everything they'd been trying to rebuild together. And Lauren realized with crystal clarity that she would rather walk away forever than be the reason Alistair lost his child. But first, they had to survive tomorrow's hearing, and that would require not just love, but strategy, courage, and the kind of partnership that could withstand not only their own past mistakes, but the determined sabotage of someone who wanted to destroy them both. Chapter 4. The courthouse at 8 in the morning felt like a battlefield dressed in marble and mahogany. Lauren sat in the back, her FBI credentials giving her access, but her emotional investment making every breath labored. Madison sat across the aisle with her legal team, projecting calm confidence, while Alistair looked exhausted from a sleepless night spent preparing for this fight. Judge Morrison entered with the same stern authority Lauren remembered from their divorce proceedings. Her sharp eyes surveyed the courtroom, lingering for a moment on Lauren before settling on the legal teams. "This court will hear the emergency motion filed by Madison Pierce for temporary custody modification regarding the minor child Ethan Belvedere," Judge Morrison announced. What followed was a systematic character assassination, disguised as legal argument. Madison's lawyer painted Alistair as emotionally unstable, citing his erratic behavior during his son's kidnapping, his impulsive decision to end a stable relationship immediately after a crisis, and his reckless choice to reunite with an ex-wife whose fitness had been questioned during their original custody proceedings. Lauren felt each word like a physical blow, not just because of the attack on her character, but because of the twisted way every moment of panic during Ethan's disappearance was being reframed as evidence of instability. The photographs Madison's team presented made Lauren's stomach clench. Surveillance images of Alistair leaving the FBI safe house looking exhausted, pictures of him embracing Lauren after Ethan's rescue, documentation of his sleepless nights during the kidnapping crisis. Alistair's lawyer, David Kim, rose for rebuttal with controlled fury. "Your Honor, this motion is nothing more than calculated revenge disguised as concern for child welfare. Ms. Pierce has no legal standing to request custody of a child to whom she has no biological or legal relationship. The plaintiff has been a stable parental figure in the child's life for 2 years," Madison's lawyer interjected smoothly. "She is standing under the psychological parent doctrine." The legal arguments continued, but Lauren found herself watching Ethan, who sat in the designated area for children involved in custody disputes. The 12-year-old looked confused and frightened, occasionally glancing between the adults fighting over his future with an expression that broke Lauren's heart. When Judge Morrison called for a recess, Lauren watched Alistair approach his son with gentle reassurance, saw the way Ethan clung to his father with desperate trust. In the courthouse hallway, she found Alistair and his legal team huddled in urgent conference. "The judge is going to order a full psychological evaluation," David was saying, "for all parties, including Ethan. The temporary custody decision will depend heavily on what that evaluation reveals." "How long?" Alistair asked. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. During that time, Madison's emergency motion means she gets temporary custody unless we can demonstrate immediate harm." The words hit Lauren like physical blows. 6 to 8 weeks of Ethan living with someone who had manipulated this entire situation out of spite. "There's another option," Lauren said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her, and she saw understanding dawn in Alistair's eyes before she even spoke the words. "No," he said immediately. "Lauren, no, don't even consider it." "If I step back voluntarily," she continued, her voice steady despite the way her heart was breaking. "If I remove myself from the equation completely, Madison's entire case collapses. Her argument is based on the instability of our reunion. Remove me from his life, and she has no grounds." The silence was deafening. David Kim's expression shifted to professional calculation as he realized the strategic soundness of her suggestion. "It would work," he admitted reluctantly. "Without the relationship issue, Madison's case becomes much weaker." "Absolutely not," Alistair said, his voice rising. "I will not sacrifice our relationship to appease someone who's manipulating the system out of spite." "It's not appeasement," Lauren said gently, though every word cost her everything. "It's strategy. It's choosing what's best for Ethan over what we want for ourselves. What's best for Ethan is having both of us in his life. He wants his family to be safe and stable," Lauren corrected. "He wants to know that the adults he depends on will put his needs first, even when it costs them something they want desperately." Alistair stepped closer, his eyes blazing with determination. "I won't lose you again. I can't lose you again." "You're not losing me," Lauren lied, because the alternative was watching him lose his son. "You're choosing him. You're being the father he needs you to be." "There has to be another way," Alistair said desperately. "There isn't," David said quietly. "Not that guarantees Ethan stays with you. Agent Wells is right. Removing her from the equation eliminates their primary argument." Lauren watched the moment when Alistair truly understood what was being asked of him, watched the father in him war with the man who loved her, and felt her heart break for both sides of that impossible choice. "I need a moment," she said quietly, moving toward the courtroom doors. But she was already walking away, already making the decision that would save Alistair's relationship with Ethan and destroy any possibility of a future for herself and Alistair. The courthouse bathroom was empty, giving her a moment to compose herself, before returning to deliver the words that would end their second chance before it had really begun. When she returned to the hallway, Alistair was waiting with desperate hope in his eyes, and Ethan beside him, looking small and confused. "I've made my decision," she said quietly, and watched Alistair's face crumble. But before she could speak the words that would end everything, Judge Morrison's bailiff appeared with news that would change everything. "The court will reconvene immediately," he announced. "New evidence has been presented that requires immediate judicial review." Lauren felt her world shift as they filed back into the courtroom, wondering what new twist this legal nightmare would take. The courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone retook their seats, confusion evident on both legal teams' faces. Lauren noticed that Madison's confident demeanor had shifted, a tension around her eyes that suggested she was as surprised by this development as everyone else. Judge Morrison entered with a manila folder and an expression that Lauren couldn't quite read. "This court has received new evidence relevant to this custody proceeding," she announced, "evidence that significantly impacts the credibility of the plaintiff's claims." A woman Lauren didn't recognize entered the courtroom, followed by Detective Paloma Varela. Lauren's pulse quickened as possibilities raced through her mind. "The court will hear testimony from Susan Brennan," Judge Morrison continued, and Lauren felt the world tilt as she recognized the name of the social worker who had kidnapped Ethan. Susan looked different from the broken woman Lauren had confronted in the mountain cabin, cleaned up, clearly receiving mental health treatment, but her eyes held the same pain that had driven her to desperate measures. "Miss Brennan," Judge Morrison said sternly, "you understand that you are testifying under oath despite your current legal situation?" "Yes, Your Honor. I have information about this custody case that this court needs to hear." What Susan revealed made Lauren's blood run cold. During her months of planning Ethan's kidnapping, Susan had conducted extensive surveillance of the Belvedere family, surveillance that had involved monitoring Madison Pierce's communications. "I recorded hours of conversations," Susan testified, her voice growing stronger. "Miss Pierce was systematically documenting Mr. Belvedere's emotional responses, his parenting decisions, his relationship struggles. She was building a case against him long before Agent Wells re-entered the picture." Madison's lawyer was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is from an unreliable witness with obvious mental health issues." "Overruled," Judge Morrison said sharply. "The witness may continue." Susan looked directly at Madison. She spoke frequently on the phone about documenting his instability and creating a paper trail that would support custody modification. She photographed him during private moments, recorded conversations without his knowledge. Detective Varela approached with a box of evidence that made Madison's face go white. "The defendant's electronics were recovered during the kidnapping investigation," Paloma explained. "Analysis revealed extensive documentation of surveillance activities, including these recordings." The audio that played in the courtroom was devastating. Madison's voice, clear and calculated, discussing with an accomplice how to neutralize the ex-wife threat and create circumstances that would force Alistair to choose between his kid and his obsession with that FBI bitch. Lauren felt Alistair's shock reverberate through the courtroom as they heard the woman he'd trusted reveal her true feelings about him, about her, about the child she claimed to care about. "Furthermore," Susan continued, "Miss Pierce made contact with me months before I took Ethan. She didn't hire me directly, but she provided information about the family's vulnerabilities, about ways to exploit their situation." The courtroom erupted. Madison's lawyer was objecting frantically, but Judge Morrison was studying the evidence with the expression of someone whose patience had been exhausted. "Your Honor," Madison's lawyer said desperately, "these recordings were obtained illegally. The recordings were obtained during a federal investigation into child kidnapping," Detective Varela interjected smoothly. "They were discovered as evidence in a federal crime and are fully admissible." Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from stern neutrality to barely contained outrage. "Miss Pierce," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom noise like ice, "are you prepared to respond to these allegations under oath?" Lauren watched Madison calculate her options, seeing the exact moment when she realized her carefully constructed case was collapsing around her. Your Honor, I was concerned about Ethan's welfare," Madison stammered, her polished facade crumbling. "I documented things because I was worried." "By secretly recording private conversations? By coordinating with someone planning to kidnap the child you claim to be protecting?" Judge Morrison held up one of the audio transcripts. "This court has heard testimony and reviewed evidence indicating that your concern for this child's welfare was secondary to your desire to control and manipulate his father's personal relationships." The judge turned to Susan. "Miss Brennan, is there additional information this court should consider?" "Yes, Your Honor." Susan straightened, looking directly at Alistair. During my surveillance and my time with Ethan, I observed his interactions with both his father and with Agent Wells. Ethan Belvedere is not a damaged child from a broken home. He's a resilient, emotionally intelligent boy who loves his father deeply and has maintained hope for family reconciliation. Susan's voice grew stronger with conviction. Agent Wells represents stability and maternal connection to that child. Her presence in his life provides emotional security, not trauma. The toxic dynamics Miss Pierce documented were not between father and son or between the child and Agent Wells, but between Mr. Belvedere and Miss Pierce herself, who created conflict through her surveillance and manipulation. Judge Morrison reviewed her notes, the evidence, the testimonies that had completely transformed the landscape of this custody hearing. When she looked up, her expression was one of someone who had seen too many custody battles weaponize children's welfare for adult agendas. This court finds that Miss Pierce's emergency motion for custody modification was filed without merit and with potential malicious intent, Judge Morrison announced. The evidence suggests systematic manipulation designed not to protect the minor child, but to control and isolate his father. Lauren felt Alistair's relief, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds that Miss Pierce's actions may have contributed to circumstances that endangered the child she claims to protect. Effective immediately, all contact between Miss Pierce and the minor child, Ethan Belvedere, is suspended pending further investigation. Madison's face went white as the implications sank in. Not only had her custody grab failed, but she was now facing potential criminal charges. Mr. Belvedere, Judge Morrison continued, this court recognizes that you have been the victim of systematic manipulation and surveillance. Your custody of your son remains unchanged and unchallenged. But it was Judge Morrison's next words that made Lauren's heart race with hope. Agent Wells, the judge said, looking directly at Lauren, please approach the bench. Lauren moved forward on unsteady legs. Agent Wells, during the original custody proceedings 8 years ago, this court witnessed the destructive dissolution of your marriage to Mr. Belvedere. However, the evidence presented today, combined with testimony about your professional conduct during the kidnapping crisis, suggests significant personal growth and emotional maturity. Lauren felt her throat tighten as Judge Morrison continued. Miss Brennan's observations about the positive impact of your presence in Ethan Belvedere's life are noted by this court. While I cannot mandate personal relationships, I can state for the record that this court sees no legal impediment to your involvement in this child's life, should all parties choose to pursue such involvement. The words were carefully neutral, legally appropriate, but Lauren heard the subtext clearly. Judge Morrison was giving judicial approval to their reunion, recognizing that the people who had once destroyed each other had grown into individuals capable of healthy family relationships. Thank you, Your Honor, Lauren managed, as the hearing concluded, as Madison retreated in defeat, as Ethan ran to embrace both his father and the woman who had helped save him. Lauren felt something she'd never experienced before, the weight of victory earned through truth, growth, and love that chose sacrifice over selfishness. So, Alistair said quietly as they stood outside the courthouse, sunlight warming their faces and Ethan chattering excitedly about going home together. Does this mean you'll give us another chance? Lauren looked at the man who had fought for her, who had refused to sacrifice their love even when it seemed strategically sound, who had trusted that truth would prevail. She looked at the boy who had called her when his father needed help, who represented the possibility of healing wounds she'd thought would never stop aching. I think, she said, smiling through tears of relief and hope, it means we give each other another chance. All of us, as a family. 6 months later, the same courthouse that had witnessed the destruction of their first marriage and the defense of their second chance became the setting for something Lauren had never dared to dream. Their remarriage, with Ethan serving as ring-bearer and Judge Morrison officiating with the satisfaction of someone whose faith in human redemption had been vindicated. The ceremony was small, attended only by people who had supported them through the darkness. Detective Paloma Varela stood as Lauren's maid of honor, while Desmond Rodriguez served as Alistair's best man. But it was Ethan who stole the show, his frame nearly bursting with pride as he carried the rings that would bind his family back together. The vows they exchanged were nothing like the romantic promises of their first wedding. These were harder words, honest words, born from understanding that love was not the absence of conflict, but the choice to build instead of destroy. "I promise," Alistair said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with tears, "to choose vulnerability over control, truth over pride, us over fear. I promise to fight for you instead of against you, to be your partner in all things, and to remember that our love is not just about us, it's about the family we're choosing to create together." Lauren's response came from 8 years of separation and hard-won wisdom. "I promise to stay and fight instead of running when things get difficult. I promise to trust you with my heart even when it feels risky, to communicate instead of withdrawing, and to remember that the strongest families are built not from perfection, but from the choice to love each other through imperfection." When Judge Morrison pronounced them married, the same judge who had witnessed their divorce and their custody battle, there wasn't a dry eye in the small courtroom. The reception was held at their house now, with the backyard transformed into a celebration space where past and present merged into something beautiful. Lauren wore a simple cream dress instead of an elaborate gown, and Alistair had traded his morning coat for a suit that made his eyes look like storm clouds touched with sunlight. 2 years later, their family was complete in ways Lauren had never imagined possible. Their daughter Emma arrived on a crisp October morning, perfectly healthy and bearing the determined expression that ran in the Belvedere family line. Holding her newborn daughter while Alistair dozed in the hospital chair and Ethan peered over her shoulder with protective fascination, Lauren felt the final pieces of her heart settle into place. This was what they'd been fighting toward through all the pain and separation and legal battles, not just romantic reconciliation, but the creation of something larger than themselves, something worth every risk they'd taken to get here. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding the perfect person, they're about becoming the right person for someone imperfect. Lauren and Alistair's journey reminds us that healing is possible, that people can change, and that love has the power to transform our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths. Have you ever gotten a second chance at love? Have you seen relationships heal after devastating betrayal? I'd love to hear your stories of redemption and forgiveness in the comments below. Your experiences inspire these stories and remind us all that hope is never truly lost. If Lauren and Alistair's journey touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about love's power to heal and transform. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. We all need reminders that broken things can become beautiful again. Tomorrow, we'll explore another story of unexpected love when a successful businesswoman discovers her late father's secret and the mysterious man who's been protecting it for decades. You won't want to miss how family secrets can lead to the most unexpected romances.